this month's newsletter, a gentle girl named Katie was nice enough to ask us, when it comes to patellofemoral problems, what are the things that I should be looking at? And it's a great question. And so really in all of these newsletters, everything is a great question because everything's related to everything. And so I don't even really know why I answer them because it's all going to come down to the exact same answer. Now, with that being said, when we think about historically how they looked at the patellofemoral joint, okay, they would look at the joint more here and here, and we kind of have to step back and think to ourselves, is that functional? Because when you think about function, it needs to look like function, okay? It needs to taste like function, okay? It needs to smell. It needs to smell. It just needs to smell like function, right? So if function smelt like an anus, it needs to smell like that. Okay, if it smelled like flowers, it needs to smell like flowers. Now, let's get back to the point at hand, because I am going to wait until later in the newsletter to get on tangents that don't have really anything to do with what we're talking about. Now, if we think about the knee, and we think about when it lands, we have to think about the foot. And the foot, it collapses in. And it does this beautiful collapse in. It has a hat, a pretty hat, maybe a sombrero. You know, I had a sombrero when I was a kid. Comes back here, goes down in here, and then the patella is going to follow that tibia, and the patella is going to follow the femur, because the femur is the tibia, and the tibia is the foot, and the foot is the hip. And I'm really a girl. Boys are girls. It's the same thing. Now, if we look at this, we want to ask ourselves the question, the knee reacts. And so if I was a foot and my foot collapsed in and that made my knee move, if I was the foot, I'd look up at the patella and I'd say, thank you, patella. Thank you so much. Because you just did what I need to happen. And as the patella goes in, then the femur internally rotates. That causes my pelvis to internally rotate because my femur internally rotates faster. That causes hip internal rotation, which helps to decelerate this femoral internal rotation, which helps the patella be happy. The patella is like, it's like that friend who, if he does things the right way, he makes everybody happy, but he's kind of dependent on everybody else, okay? He's like that child that needs the big brother and the little brother. He's the middle brother. He doesn't really do much. He reacts, okay? So if you're the patella and I'm going down in here, I got to look up at the femur and I got to look down at the tibia, and I want to hear them say, just like my big brother would tell me, you're my train. You are my caboose. And I would step back and say, wow, that means a lot. So that's kind of cool. Now, we have to look at all that stuff. And so you might be thinking to yourself, well, Gary, you just went through the foot, and you went through the hip, and I know you love the foot, and I know you love the big toe. Are you telling me I have to know all those things? And I would say, yeah, I am. And not only that, I have to think about the counter rotation of the thoracic spine. So you got to know that. And I got to think about the counter rotation of my cervical spine. And then I got to think about, is my rectus capitis posterior minor on my right side potentially going to cause me a cervicogenic headache, which could filter all the way down into my patella? Are you asking me, are you telling me that I have to know that? And I would say, yeah, that's what I'm telling you. You would say, are you telling me that you have to know every single joint in the body? And I would say, yeah. And I would say, you got to know philosophy, and you got to know theology. You have to know linear regression. In fact, you have to know string theory of the universe to really understand how the knee functions, okay? Let me give you guys a hint. When I do these newsletters, when I start asking these rhetorical questions, the answer is always going to be yes, okay? So when you have to understand anything in the body, you have to understand how every other thing in the universe works. Now, if we go back to thinking about this patella, we tend traditionally to just think about it in terms of the physical. But we know, because we're three-dimensional creatures, that we have to think not just about the physical, but about the mind, and we have to think about spirit. The spirit. In the sagittal plane, in the frontal plane, in the transverse plane. Okay? And really, if you think about this patella, it wants to dance. It wants to dance. Okay? And it wants to be able to pick up my kids. Pick up my kids. Now, I've never seen anybody pick up their kids like this, but it has to do that. And it not has to do that just in the sagittal plane. It has to do that in the frontal plane. Okay? Has to do that in the transverse plane. It has to be able to twist the kid as he vomits. in the transverse plane. It has to vomit in the frontal plane. It wants to vomit in the sagittal plane. And so, really, if you think about a lot of these things, you think, interestingly enough, this knee needs to dance and dance. And all of us, interestingly enough, we all want to dance into a classroom, to a children's classroom. And interestingly enough, when we land in our subtalar joint pronates, and our knee goes through internal rotation, and our hip goes through internal rotation, and our trunk goes through right rotation, and we look straight ahead into left cervical rotation, we have done all that work to look into that classroom and say, I want that kid. And the teacher would look at us and say, what kid? And we would say, that kid back there. She'd say, who? I'd say, the one in all black. And she'd say, wait, you're telling me that you want that kid? And I'd say, that's what I'm telling you. And she'd say, what do you mean? I go, that kid right there. He's going to run for 30 minutes straight in the tweak train. What's the tweak train? It doesn't matter. Look at me. And she would say, well, what do you mean? I say, I want that kid. She said, you're telling me that you're going to stand in that weird position and tell me you want that kid? And I say, that's what I'm telling you. And I'm going to tell you in the sagittal plane, and I'm going to tell you in the frontal plane, and I'm going to tell you in the transverse plane. I like to say transverse and really pronounce this part of it. And she said, that's what you're telling me. I said, yeah, that's what I'm telling you. And she would say, wait, you're telling me that that kid's going to run 30 minutes? And I say, I'm not even telling you he's going to run 30 minutes. But I'm telling you that that kid's going to, you know how he's kind of depressed right now and he's not really involved? That kid's going to be involved. And she said, you're telling me that? I said, yeah, I'm telling you that. And I'd say, interestingly enough, that kid is going to run 30 minutes straight and raise money. And she said, you're telling me that kid back there, the one listening to rock music that loud that doesn't even pay attention to my class? I'd say, that's what I'm telling you. And she said, I just asked the question about the patella. How'd you get into the Gothic kid who's going to build the garden for a classroom? And I'd say, that's what I'm telling you. And she'd look at me and she would say, you're on drugs. I think you're on drugs. I think you're really taking something. And I would say, that might be what you're telling me, but what I'm telling you is that I'm going after that kid. And that kid's going to build a garden. And if you think about the patella, that is the point of the patella. To answer the question, if we take back and we really think about it and we think about everything that's involved, we got to step back and we got to think to ourselves, wow, the job of the patella is to build a garden. But in order to build the garden, all those things have to function together. The foot, the hip, the thoracic spine, the opposite side hip, okay, the descending colon, okay, the heart, okay, the vagus nerve, the diaphragm, okay, C3, 4, and 5, what does it do? It keeps the diaphragm alive, okay? So that's what we're thinking. I know it's a lot, but that's what gets me excited in all three planes. What am I doing here? I'm doing sign language. 3D awesome, okay? 3D awesome for the colon, for the kid, for the garden. Now I'm just going to figure out what to say to make this webcast 10 minutes longer. That's what I would like to do. But I don't know that. So I'm just going to stop now. But I'm going to tell a story that doesn't have anything to do with any of this. When I was a kid, I didn't know what the body parts were. And so I got something in the mail, and I got that thing in the mail, and it said, well, here's an ankle joint. And I said, well, if I want to learn about the ankle joint, I want to order something else. And so, you guessed it. You can say it. You can say it. I ordered Jack's penis and Jill's vagina. And I got it in. I thought, wow, that's kind of cool. Never seen one of those before. I wonder what those look like. That's the point of the patella.